You hear the buggy wheels stop on the gravel outside, and your stomach drops. It doesn't matter if you've been praying all morning or if your floors are scrubbed so clean you could eat off them. When the bishops come, the air in the house changes. It gets thicker. It tastes like copper. I'm going to tell you what happens when the door closes and the shades are drawn. Not the sermons, not the kneeling, but the questions they ask a married woman that no man, holy or not, should ever have the right to ask. Things about the marriage bed that would make a doctor blush. Things that still, at 65 years old, make my skin feel like it doesn't belong to me. Welcome back to the channel. I see you've pulled up a chair, and I don't blame you. We're going deep into the shadowy corner of the pantry tonight, the place where the plain people don't just sweep the dirt under the rug, but nail the rug to the floorboards so you can't even peek. Today, I'm not here to talk about barn raisings or shoe-fly pie. I'm here to take you behind the closed door of the bedroom, but not in the way you think. I want to tell you about the ritual of the Unterredung, the private council. Twice a year, like clockwork, the spiritual authority of our district came to my house, sat at my kitchen table, and weighed my soul against the Ordnung. But the scale they used to weigh me wasn't the Bible, it was my marriage bed. Have you ever sat in your own home and felt like a trespasser on your own body? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in that cold, hollow feeling. Now let me set the scene for you. It's late autumn, 1962. The harvest is in, the cannery is full, and there's a stillness outside that you can hear. I was 19 years old, newly married just 6 weeks, still blushing at the way the morning light hit my husband John's broad shoulders as he walked out to the barn. I was innocent. No, that's not the right word. I was ignorant. There's a vast difference. My mother had told me nothing. Not one word about what happened between a man and a wife. The night before my wedding, she pressed a white nightgown into my hands and said, "Submit, and God will bless the fruit." That was the entirety of my education. So I thought the bishops, 2 of them always traveled together, one from our district and one visiting, to keep the judgment pure, were coming to inspect our spiritual health. I had the coffee percolating. I had the sand tarts arranged on the best china. I wore my blackest dress, the one that buttoned up to my chin, and my stiffest, most unyielding prayer covering. When they knocked, the sound wasn't a request. It was a command. John opened the door. His face was ashen. I didn't understand why he looked so scared. Just that morning, he'd held my hand under the breakfast table, a secret squeeze that made my heart flutter. Now his hand was shaking at his side. I saw his eyes dart toward the hallway that led to our bedroom, then back to me. There was a warning in them I couldn't yet read. Bishop Miller, a man who smelled of snuff and damp wool, didn't waste a second. "The world is a snare," he said, not to me, but to John. "We must ensure your house is free of the flesh." The inspection started right then. But it wasn't the house they inspected. It was the invisible sense of the heart and the very visible geography of my body. They asked John to leave the room first. That's the rule. They separate the husband from the wife. Divide and conquer is not a military strategy, my dear friends. It is a marital interrogation technique used by the church. John paused at the door. He looked back at me, and I saw something break in his eyes. A man watching his bride led to the slaughter, while he was sent to the barn like a scolded schoolboy. He opened his mouth to speak, but Bishop Miller raised a single finger, and John walked out. That moment, that silence, would haunt our marriage for 40 years. I was alone with 2 old men who had the power to shun me if my answers didn't satisfy them. Bishop Miller sat down, but the other one, Deacon Yoder, stood by the window, blocking the light. He was younger, with a face that never smiled. "Sister," Bishop Miller began, his voice a low rumble. "Do you submit joyfully to your husband?" I nodded, whispering yes. That was the easy part. But then he leaned forward and the chair creaked like a dying animal. "I need more than a nod. I need specifics. When your husband requires his marital rights, do you turn your face to the wall, or do you participate with a cheerful countenance?" My mouth went dry. How do you answer that? If I said I turned my face away, I was a cold, ungodly wife, denying him the comfort God ordained. If I said I was cheerful, if I admitted to feeling joy, then I was a harlot, a woman consumed by the lusts of the world. I sat there, my hands shaking, trying to find the patch of ground between the cliff of frigidity and the pit of damnation. I thought of my mother. What would she say? She'd say nothing. She'd bow her head and whisper. So I did the same. I do not refuse him, I managed. That wasn't enough for Bishop Miller. He clicked his tongue. Refusing is one sin. Wanting is another. We must guard against the sin of pleasure-seeking. Does your intimacy serve only for the creation of children, or have you allowed the serpent into the marriage bed? Can you imagine the terror of that question? You're barely more than a child, and a man who claims to speak for God is asking you if you felt a tremor of ecstasy. It's a trap, a beautifully constructed, silk-threaded trap. If you say you felt something, you're confessing to witchcraft of the senses. If you say you feel nothing, you're admitting you are dead inside, which is an insult to God's design. I started to cry, silently, the tears just rolling down and soaking into the black polyester of my collar. The deacon by the window spoke up, his voice sharper. "The marriage garment. Does your husband keep his shirt on when he comes to you?" Now stop right here. Let that sink in. They wanted to know what we wore, or didn't wear. In the Amish world, the clothing is a symbol of our separation from the world. To take off the clothes, to be naked, even in the dark with your lawful spouse, was considered animalistic. It was seen as returning to the Garden of Eden before the fall, a place of shame. They asked me if we used a sheet to cover ourselves, or if we looked upon the nakedness. They used the German word bloß, which sounds like a wound when you say it. I whispered that we were modest. A lie. The first of many I told in that kitchen to survive. Because the truth was, my John, he was young and strong. And in the pitch black of night, when the world was asleep, we were not two farmers. We were Adam and Eve. We did look. We did touch. Just the week before, he'd traced the curve of my hip with his rough carpenter's hand and whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing God ever made." But sitting there under the bishop's gaze, I knew that truth would be a weapon they'd use to carve out my heart and show it to the congregation. So I lied. But here's the hook, the thing that has haunted me for 45 years. They didn't just listen to my words. They watched my body. They were trained in what they called flesh discernment. Bishop Miller told me to stand up. He asked me to remove my apron and place it on the table. He circled me, much like a buyer inspects a heifer at the auction. "You've been married 6 weeks," he said, "yet your hips have not widened. Has your husband spilled his seed on the ground? Because the sin of Onan is a stench in the nostrils of the Lord." The audacity. The biological ignorance wrapped in theological poison. I was barely married, and they were already interrogating my barrenness before any child could possibly have taken root. They assumed my husband was engaging in a specific, private act that prevented conception. They were asking me if I was a partner to a specific sexual deviation. They used scriptural language to ask me about the most intimate mechanics of my husband's climax. I wanted to die. I literally felt my soul try to lift out of my body and pass through the ceiling. That night, when John came in from the barn, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. The coffee had gone cold. My eyes were red. He knelt beside my chair, not as a husband, but as a penitent. "What did they ask you?" he whispered. I couldn't look at him. "Everything," I said. He buried his face in my lap and wept. We didn't touch each other that night. We lay in the dark, side by side, the bishop's questions lying between us like a third body. That was the first time the marriage bed became a grave. Let's pause that terrible scene for just a moment, because I see you shifting in your seat. What would you have done? If a religious authority in your life, someone you believed held the keys to your eternal salvation, asked you to detail the fluids and the sounds of your nighttime union, would you submit to save your place in the community, or would you walk out? Type your answer below. I read every single one, and let me tell you, the courage to walk out wasn't something they bred into women in my generation. The visits came twice a year, spring and fall, and each time something inside me changed. The fall visit was always the harshest. It was as if the bishops sensed the long winter nights approaching, and they knew that in the dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a man and a woman might actually find warmth in each other's arms. The bishop's visit was meant to put a layer of frost over that warmth. The second time they came, I was different. The first visit had broken my innocence. The second visit, I arrived with armor. I had practiced a face, a blank, doll-like stare. I had memorized the acceptable phrases. Submission is my duty. The flesh is weak. We seek only the blessing of children. But inside, a small fire had begun to burn, a tiny rebellion. I had stitched a hidden piece of red ribbon inside my nightgown, a secret streak of color against my skin that only I knew about. In the dark, when John slept, I would touch that ribbon and remind myself that I was still a woman, not just a vessel. This time, Bishop Yoder came alone. Bishop Miller had passed on. A stroke took him in the milking parlor. Bishop Yoder was different. He was softer, which was more dangerous. Bishop Miller was a wolf with fangs. Bishop Yoder was a constrictor. He smiled. He asked me if I was happy in my service. He asked me to come closer to the table. "Sister," he said, "I hear the spirit of restlessness in your gait. There is a wildness in the women of this district. Have you taken precautions to stop the curse of blood from coming?" He meant my monthly cycle. He wanted to know if I was using Middle, any herbs or methods to control my fertility. "Some women," he hissed, "feed their husbands catnip tea to cool his blood. Or they use the rhythm of the moon to lock their wombs. This is the sin of sorcery." But this time, something shifted in me. I looked at him, this man who had never borne a child, who had never bled, who had never felt the terror of a pregnancy that wouldn't come or a pregnancy that would. And I thought, you know nothing. You know nothing of my body. I didn't say it, but I thought it, and that thought was a seed. The question that broke me came next. Does your husband approach you from the front, like the beasts of the field? Or does he honor the face-to-face posture ordained by the old ways for procreation? I felt vomit rise in my throat. They had mapped out our positions. They believed certain intimate alignments were purely for animal lust, while only one was acceptable for God-fearing folk who were trying to conceive. I couldn't speak. My silence was a confession. Bishop Yoder saw the crack in my armor. "The bed is a sacrament," he whispered, "but only if it is a cross of duty, not a bed of roses. Do you lie on a mattress of duty or a bed of roses?" I thought of John's hand tracing my hip. I thought of the red ribbon, and I broke. Duty, I choked out. Only duty. He smiled, satisfied, because he knew I was lying. But the lie shamed me enough to keep me compliant. After he left, John came in. He saw my face. He didn't ask what they'd said. He just wrapped his arms around me, right there in the kitchen, and held me while I sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry." That embrace was our small victory. The bishops could interrogate us, but they couldn't stop him from holding me when the storm passed. We held on to those moments like drowning people clinging to driftwood. Let's talk about Sadie. Every district has a Sadie. She was 22, with hair the color of wheat and a laugh that sounded like a running brook. She was married the same year as me. After her first bishop visit, she came to my house, trembling. "They asked me if I enjoyed it," she whispered. "I didn't know I was supposed to say no. I said yes. I said yes, and the deacon's face went white." Sadie was called into a members' meeting. Bishop Yoder stood up and announced, without naming the sin, that a root of bitterness had sprung up, a Jezebel spirit of worldly desire. They shunned Sadie for 6 weeks. Her crime? She had admitted under pressure that she enjoyed the embrace of her groom. She was punished for joy. Let that sink in. The very thing the outside world tells you is the glue of a healthy marriage, mutual pleasure, is the evidence of demonic possession in an Amish closed-door session. Sadie was forced to sit at the back, eat alone, and not sleep with her husband for 6 weeks as a cooling-off period. I visited her during the shunning. It was forbidden, but I went anyway. I brought her a loaf of bread and sat at her table. She didn't speak. She wasn't allowed to speak to me. But I held her hand. I saw her eyes. The brook had frozen over. When she was finally restored, her laugh was gone. She did her duty, had 12 children, and died at 52 of a worn-out heart. I blame the bishops, not God, the bishops. But Sadie's story lit something in me. I saw what happened when you told the truth, and I saw what happened when you didn't. Both roads led to suffering, but one road, at least, let you keep your soul. Then came the spring of 1982. By now, I was 39 years old. I'd buried my mother. I'd raised 5 children. My body had stretched and bled and nursed, and I'd earned every gray hair and every wrinkle. John and I had built a life together, a quiet life, a careful life, but a life with moments of stolen tenderness. We'd learned to speak in code, to touch in the dark, to love each other in the spaces between the rules. That spring, the rain was so heavy the gutters were flooding. Bishop Yoder came alone, which was unusual. The deacon was sick. He was alone with me. John was stuck in the south field, trying to drain the corn. The air was electric with the storm. He sat at my kitchen table, soaked to the bone. His eyes had a glassy look. He didn't stick to the script. He looked at me and said, "Sister, the flesh is a mystery. St. Paul said it is better to marry than to burn. Do you burn?" The question hung in the air, intimate, terrifyingly direct. This was beyond the script. This was a man alone with a woman asking her if she burned with desire. And something in me, something that had been growing for 17 years, straightened its spine. I looked at him. I saw the tremor in his hands. I saw the hunger in his eyes, a hunger disguised as righteousness. And I realized he was the one who burned, not me. He was the one who thought about the marriage beds of his flock because his own bed was cold and empty. He was the voyeur, the hungry ghost, and I was his meal. "Bishop," I said, my voice steady for the first time in 17 years. My husband is not here to protect my virtue from this conversation. We must stop. He recoiled as if I had slapped him, because I had drawn a line. A woman had just told a bishop that talking to her alone about this was a threat to her own virtue, implying he was a predator, not a shepherd. He sputtered, stood up, and walked out into the rain without a slice of bread. He never looked me in the eye again. When John came home, I told him what happened. I expected him to be angry at me, to tell me I'd overstepped. Instead, he took my face in his hands and looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Pride. "You did that?" he whispered. "You sent him away?" I nodded. He pulled me close. "My fierce wife," he said. "My fierce, brave wife." That night, we didn't sleep in separate silence. We talked until dawn. For the first time, we were allies, not victims. That was the turning point, the year I found my voice. I didn't stop the visits. I couldn't stop the system, but I stopped being its victim. When the bishops came after that, I answered their questions with the required words, but my eyes said something different. My eyes said, "I see you, and you do not own me." The visits continued, but they changed. Once I passed 45 and my womb was quiet, the bishops lost interest in my body. They asked no more about the marriage bed, as if passion could not possibly exist in a woman of my years. But they still came. They came to inspect my submission to John's authority in financial matters, in gardening, in the raising of my daughters. They feared the older women the most because we knew the secrets. I became one of those women, the ones who brew the teas, the ones who whisper to the young brides, the ones who say, "He will ask you if you enjoy it. Here is what you say. Here is how you survive." I became the mother I never had. I built an underground railroad of words, passed from kitchen to kitchen, beneath the notice of the bishops. John and I grew old together. The visits became background noise, a dreaded chore like cleaning the chicken coop. But something beautiful happened in those later years. We stopped being afraid. After the children left, after the house grew quiet, we rediscovered each other. We held hands on the porch swing. We laughed about the old days, the absurdity of it all. "Do you remember the question about the posture?" he'd say, and we'd laugh until tears ran down our wrinkled faces. It was a bitter laugh, but it was ours. 5 years ago, John was dying. Cancer, slow and cruel. I sat by his bed holding his hand, the same hand that had traced my hip 60 years before. His eyes, clouded with pain, suddenly cleared. He gripped my wrist with a strength that shocked me. He looked at me, and for a moment he was 22 again, and I was 19, and we were standing in the kitchen, terrified and in love. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "about the bed, about all of it. I should have protected you better." I leaned down, my gray hair brushing his cheek. "You protected me," I said. "Every night you held me, every time you wept with me, every time you made me laugh when I wanted to die. That was protection. That was love." He smiled. "I would have burned the Ordnung for you," he said. "I just didn't know how." He died that night, and I sat alone in the house where the bishops had questioned me for 40 years. But I didn't feel alone. I felt him there. I felt every moment of stolen joy, every whispered rebellion, every secret touch that the bishops never found and could never destroy. Now, at 65, I sit on this porch and look back at my life. The bishops took many things from me. They took my innocence. They took years of peace. They nearly took my marriage. But they didn't take my soul. They didn't take the love between John and me. That love grew in the cracks of their system, like a wildflower pushing through concrete. It wasn't the loud, proud love of the outside world. It was a quiet love, a hidden love, a love that survived interrogation and shame and decades of phantom chaperones. But it was real, and it was ours. What is the lesson in all of this? The bishops used their tongues to invade my bedroom. They were allowed to ask questions no human should ask another. They were allowed to control the most intimate corners of our lives. But they were not allowed to stop us from loving each other. They never found that secret place, the interior room of the heart where John and I lived, where the red ribbon still burned bright, where joy was a quiet, holy rebellion. The title of this video asked what they were allowed to do. They were allowed to sit at my kitchen table and dismantle my dignity. They were allowed to measure my body against a rule book written by men who feared women. But in the end, they were not allowed to win, because the buggy wheels that announced their arrival also announced their departure. And after they left, John and I were still there, still breathing, still loving, still human. We're coming to the end of our time by the fire. But before I let you go, I want to ask you one last thing. They never asked if I was loved. Not once. In 40 years of these closed-door meetings, not a single bishop ever took out his little notebook and said, "Sister, does your husband cherish you? Is your heart full?" The word love was a worldly song. They cared about the position of the body, but not the position of the heart. And a community that guards the pelvis but ignores the soul is not a holy community. It is a farm. So I ask you, looking at the modern world, have you ever been in a place where the rules mattered more than the relationship? Where the system cared more about what your body was doing than what your heart was screaming? If so, you've sat at my kitchen table and you felt the breath of the bishop on your neck. Tell me your story down in the comments. Let's build a testimony that the wind cannot blow away. Thank you for staying with me through the hard parts. Your attention is a gift I don't take lightly. If this video stirred something in you, share it with a person who needs to know they aren't crazy, that these things happen, and that survival is an act of profound rebellion. I'll be back on this channel soon, but until then, keep your candle lit. Keep your interior life locked away from the inspectors. God lives in the light, but he also lives in the secret places they cannot reach. And if you listen closely, on a quiet autumn night, you might hear the echo of buggy wheels on gravel. That sound used to fill me with dread. Now, at 65, it reminds me that I survived. The buggy always leaves. The interrogation always ends. But love, quiet, stubborn, hidden love, that stays forever. Good night.